Okay, well, good morning. Or yes, actually, no. Australia, it won't be morning. Australia, it's going to be evening, right?
Friday evening.
Friday evening, yeah. And for us, it's Friday. I think Friday morning for the rest of us. And I've been in Italy the last few weeks, and just arrived on Tuesday night here to London. I'll be here for until next Tuesday. They have a special festival, as I mentioned, their annual anniversary festival. Normally we have normally it's the biggest gathering of the year here, but because of the whole, coronavirus situation, we can only have technically we're meant to have 30 people, not more than that. And we'll probably have 40 or 50. It's hard to control it. And then we'll have a Zoom gathering as well. People will join around the world in Zoom festival. So we're continuing our Seeking the Essence discussion group here. Last week we had a very general overview of the Vedas, the approach of the Vedas, different lines of thought which are elaborated upon in the Vedas, different approaches to spiritual practice. And as time goes by, we concluded with what is the ideal of our lineage, the line of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srimad Bhagavatam, which was the final scripture compiled and presented by the sage Vedavyas, who did the work of organizing all of the Vedic knowledge that came through the heart of different rishis, different sages. It was Vedavyas who did that work. And he presented as like the conclusion of all of this knowledge, the text Srimad Bhagavatam, which presents in a very clear way, with strong philosophical presentation, the conception of pure love or prema as being the highest ideal of life. And that's prema being expressed in its highest form from the pure soul, not something that is a product of the mental plane or something based on a physical connection, but prema, divine love, that is expressed from the purified heart of the realized soul. And offered towards the highest conception of divinity, the highest expression of divinity, called Sri Krishna, Lord Krishna. So we can, that's this is a very, broad topic, and we can touch more upon these points as time goes by. We can elaborate upon these different points. For today, I was thinking to start with something very fundamental, and that is understanding the nature of the true self. Before we go to so many finer points and more developed conceptions, first this foundation has to be there, and understanding this, the nature of the true self, is what makes all of these other things meaningful. And so essentially, we are told the self is an eternal spiritual being. And understanding that is the basis for seeking out another life. Because as we all know, this body that we have doesn't live forever. So if we understand that there's a distinction between who I am and what this body is, then we need to seek out, okay, how can I exist beyond the existence of this body, which is temporary. We know that this body is going to drop down and die one day. So we are subject to death. So therefore, how can I continue living beyond the death of that body? If I believe it's possible for there to be a life beyond this body, beyond this world of my immediate experience, then I need to understand how that is possible. How can I connect with that finer reality even here and now, while in this body, in this world? So in Bhagavad Gita, you'll see that the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, I think you've all heard of. It's probably the most Bhagavad Gita. Okay, maybe not, but it is the most famous text that's come out of India. It appears within how can we say, a great saga, a great history called the Mahabharata. Very elaborate history, labyrinthine, elaborate history, family saga. Saying that Kat gave you, or you're asking her to give you? I'm not sure. Oh, you read it. Okay, so has some familiarity. You mean Mahabharata, or you mean Bhagavad Gita? I'm not sure what she means.
Bhagavad Gita.
Okay, wonderful, great, awesome. So, so the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there haven't begun any like spiritual teachings. Chapter 1 is kind of setting the scene, and the scene is that there's a battle about to take place between two families, two sets of cousins who end up at war with one another. And so this is kind of like the premise. And basically one family, the Pandavas, they're 5 brothers, they're on the side of righteousness, they're on the side of justice, of dharma. And they've been wronged by their cousins, who are called the Kauravas. And so in order to reclaim their dignity, to reclaim their rights to the throne and to their lands, then they have to engage in this battle. And so this is the premise, and the hero of this saga is Arjuna. And as the battle's about to start, he's surveying the two sides, and he begins to feel a great deal of doubt and lamentation, unhappiness, considering that he has to fight against even though they have been behaving wrongly, still they are his relatives. And so he becomes full of doubts about this. And so this is the start of actually, the context is not very important. And unfortunately, some people, they get kind of tripped up about how Bhagavad Gita begins, because they may say, oh, I don't like war. Why is there all this war in the background? Actually, that's beside the point. This is just like a platform for very high spiritual teachings to emerge. So the context is not actually important. It's just kind of like an excuse for spiritual knowledge to be, given. So Arjuna is full of all these doubts, and he turns to Krishna, who has very humbly and affectionately accepted the role as his chariot driver. And so Arjuna asks Krishna, taking the position of a disciple, he asks Krishna for advice. Like, what am I supposed to do? I can't do this, but I trust you. So you please advise me in this situation. And so then this is how Bhagavad Gita begins. And then it's in the second chapter that these teachings begin. And so the first teaching there is that we are not this body. We are not these bodies. And there is a distinction to be made between the body and the embodied. And the Sanskrit words there are deho, which means body, and dehi, the person inside of the body. So as I was mentioning last week, there are so many different lines of thought, so many different conceptions, so many different groups that followers of the Vedas fall into. But this is a point on which everybody agrees. There are so many different conceptions about what the real goal of life is, what is the ultimate expression of reality, what is the real purpose of life. There are many different points of disagreement, but this is something that everybody agrees on. This is like the most basic understanding that is given, with universal understanding given in the Vedas, that there is an eternal soul. And so at the moment, our bodies are in what we tend, in our jargon, we refer to as being in a conditioned state, in the sense that the soul is not able to fully express its true nature, but it's conditioned by a particular environment, particular circumstances. So you'll hear us say sometimes, we are conditioned souls, we're not in that pure state when we can fully, freely, purely express our true spiritual nature. So this is the ABCs of Vedic instruction, that we are eternal souls, and at present we are living in a temporary material environment, in a gross temporary material environment. And so there in Bhagavad Gita, in the second chapter, there at the beginning of the chapter, there's discussion of what is the true nature of the soul. There one verse there, na jayate mriyadeva karacham nayam bhutva bhavita vanabhuya jo nitya shashvasho yam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire. This is one of the more famous verses saying that the soul is never born and never dies. The soul, there was never at any point in the past when the soul came into being. There will never be a point in the future when the soul will come into being. The soul is eternally youthful and at the same time very ancient. And even if this body is killed, the soul can never be killed. There's another verse there which compares the changing of bodies to the changing of one's dress. That at the end of the day, your clothes, they've become crumpled or dirty in some way. You discard them, and the next day you put on a fresh set of clothes. So in the same way, these bodies, once they become old and worn out, then we discard them, and the soul will move to another body. And so this whole world, it is a combination of matter and spirit. And the Bhagavad Gita, later on in the Bhagavad Gita, there's discussion of the particular elements of the material plane. It's described that there are 8 elements which this material plane is comprised of. 5 gross, earth, water, fire, air, ether, and then there are also 3 subtle elements of this material plane. And this is what is tricky because it's difficult to confuse something that is subtle with something that is spiritual, but that's not the case. And this is a nice example of how the understanding in the Vedas is very refined. because there's a very you find a detailed and clear explanation there, which you don't really find anywhere else. What I'm referring to is that we see different spiritual groups nowadays. They have some appreciation for a more subtle plane, but they don't really understand what the nature of what spiritual really is. And so they may be dealing with the world of mind. They maybe deal with something, like people will talk about astral bodies and things like that. But this is all actually within the mental plane. It's still within the sphere of this material world. So we find in the Vedas a very refined and detailed explanation. There's nothing vague, there's nothing hazy there. So the three subtle elements, the three subtle energies of this material plane are described as being the mental system, the mind, the intellect, the plane of the intelligence, the plane of the mind, mental plane, the plane of the intelligence, and then the most subtle is called the ahankar, which means the ego, the very conception of self that we have in this world. And this is what causes us to identify with the particular body or particular circumstances that we find ourselves in. So that I'm a female of mixed race origin. I have brown curly hair. I like literature. I studied literature at university, and I like to go for walks or whatever it may be. Or that I'm a feminist, or I'm this or I'm that. We all have these particular conceptions of self. But then what if I'm born? If we can appreciate this Vedic idea that we're actually transmigrating through different bodies at different times in different species of life, then what happens if I'm born as a man in China, in the villages? Then I'll identify with that body and that environment, with that social strata. What happens if I'm born as a pig in Eastern Europe? Then so it's that ahankar which is causing us to identify with with that particular environment and set of circumstances. So it's very, very fascinating. And then in chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita, there's a very helpful verse which I wanted to discuss today. And we just recorded a few days ago with Griffin a video which we'll publish soon, which is discussing this verse. Welcome, Indra. Lovely to see you. This is my dear friend Indra from she lives in Ireland, originally from.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm a bit late, but I made it.
Don't worry. We're happy to have you with us. So a very helpful verse, which, because our Guru Srila Sridhar, she's pointed out that if we just look within ourselves, because he's pointed out consciousness can know consciousness. Consciousness can contact consciousness. So we can look within ourselves and try to assess, try to analyze these different aspects within ourselves, like through a process of elimination. We can look at the body and say, I am distinct from this body. If I cut my arm off, I'm still here. It's not that there's a distinction between this body and who I am. So that verse, Indriyani pranya horindriyagda paramanaha manasastu prabudyo varatastu sa. So there's a development here from more gross to more subtle aspects of our existence in this plane. So first there is this objective world around us. There are the objects of the senses. And then more subtle than that are the senses themselves, which allow for our first contact with this plane. This sense, the sight, sound, taste, smell, touch, through these senses we're able to have some experience, some perception of this world around us. And then the mind is more subtle than the senses, and the mind is described as being the seat of all sense experience. The senses are collecting information from the environment around us, and then they are depositing that information with the mind. And so we can see sometimes if our senses may be collecting information, but if our mind is absent, then that information won't register within us. So, sometimes we experience delayed reactions, right? Like you're cooking, maybe you burn your finger, but your mind is somewhere else. Your mind is absorbed in something else, or you may be on a phone call and texting something at the same time. And more often than not, you'll neglect one side there and you're not able to register everything that you've been told, or your friend may be telling you something, but your mind telling you a story, but your mind is somewhere else. And so you're not able to respond to them properly, or there may even be some loud noise, but we're very absorbed in something that we're reading. And so we're not really registering that sound. And the mind is also described as mostly acting in the mode of like and dislike, accept, reject. There's this kind of like immediate reaction to things on the basis of what we find pleasing. And then more subtle than the mind is the plane of the intellect, which is a more stable element within ourselves, which allows for discrimination, for consideration, with sober decision making. So our minds may tell us one thing, and then the intellect will steady the mind and say, well, I'm not so sure about that. The mind may say, oh, I really want to smoke a whole pack of cigarettes, or I really want to eat this chocolate cake. And then the intellect will say, well, your diabetes or your cholesterol or your lungs or whatever it may be, And so we can see in persons who have uncontrolled minds, they do things which are very bad for them. They'll have terrible health conditions as a result, simply because their mind's telling them, I like this, and because their intellect is weak, then they're not able to steady and control their minds. You see that with children also. You can't really have a rational discussion with a young child. You can't sit and explain to them in a discriminating way different points to consider. If you're trying to give them some medicine, if it tastes bad, they won't take it. And you can't explain, oh, this is good for you. No, they're just going to spit it out. So the intellect, allows for discrimination, consideration, analysis, these things. And then, as I mentioned before, then more subtle than the intellect is the ahankar, the false ego, which another way that Srila Sridhar Maharaj, our grandfather guru, describes the ahankar, the ego, is as a machine that is receiving and transmitting false information. Because the ego, the false ego, creates these filters on our consciousness. As I was mentioning, we identify as a young American female or an older African male, or whatever maybe. We have these particular identities, and I'm from such and such economic status and social status and educational background, et cetera, and these all create, and we identify with these things, and these create filters. I'm a conservative, I'm a socialist, I'm a Democrat. And these create filters through which we view the environment. And so we all have a distorted version. We all have our own unique distorted version of interpretation of what's going on in the environment. Like we're seeing now with this, as for an example, this COVID situation. There's so much, it's overwhelming, the amount of discussion that's going on, and there's so many different theories as to why it's going on, what's really happening, who's the real cause of it, what's the real solution, is there a solution, is it all a conspiracy, and if so, is it conspiracy A, B, C, D, E, F, G? There's so much discussion. So we're all looking at this situation through a particular set of filters and giving our own version of what's going on. What's really going on, I don't know. So we have like, there's this other expression, interpretive bias, but there's another way of saying it which I can't remember. I don't know if someone here can remember. But psychologist Melanie remembers.
Implicit bias? Implicit
bias. There's another way I've heard it described too, but I can't remember. But you understand what I'm saying, So psychologists talk about this, right? That we all have.
Social construct.
Is that Ananda, Indra? Oh, Ananda.
Hello. I'm sorry to disturb you guys.
Please let us see you.
Hello. I just woke up.
He just woke up.
Oh,
nice shift,
Yeah.
Wow, so good to see you.
Sorry to disturb you guys. Nice to see you.
It's been so long.
Yeah. Well, we'll see you soon, hopefully.
Yeah,
anyway.
I hope so. Okay. I hope by the grace of coronavirus.
Yeah.
It's just what you said, the conspiracy theory.
Yeah, no, we don't worry about that.
Yeah.
But they let all the flying and all these kind of things,
Yeah, that's the only problem, whether it's actually possible.
Yeah, I'm sure it will,
It will work out the best way,
Okay, sorry guys. I'll see you later.
Okay, so
I had a little question related to you're explaining the steps, the mind and then the intellect, and if your mind is weak and the intellect is not strong, but then even if you have the intellect about something and you find that sometimes you can't do the right thing or something, is that the ego then not letting you, or that's like no willpower or something? What do you need that extra when you have the mind and the intelligence is like not that bad, but then you still do the right thing, or something was good for you, or
well, there's a difference between, because there's always how can I say, there's a gradation here. So we may have, our intellect may be developed enough to be able to see where we're going wrong, but it may not be strong enough to actually implement that. So, whereas,
So
you know, go ahead.
you just need to strengthen the intellect more. There's, I understand. So there's gradation.
Yeah. If the intellect becomes stronger, then then you will be able to master the mind through that. You know, definitely. But yeah. It's interesting, you know, when you have this knowledge, then you see the environment in a different way. You know, like when I was flying over to London the other day, I had a middle seat, which I hate. I mean, I think most people, they don't like middle seats, right? but it was actually interesting. It was a British Airways flight, so it was a good airline, so it wasn't too bad. But it was actually quite interesting because I was seated between, on my left was this young Italian woman, and then on my right was this older British man. And the lady next to me, the woman, her mind was so agitated, and she was fidgeting the whole flight, like on her phone, scrolling through pictures, typing messages, tapping her fingers, filing her nails, twiddling with her hair, and she had these like a jingly designer bracelet. She's jingling, and like I could see her mind was so powerful within her. She was so agitated. But then the man on my right, it was like complete opposite. Like he was living in the world of intellect. He was very sober, very kind of like slow and considered in his movements. He had a notebook that he was writing in, and sometimes looking out the window, sometimes writing in his notebook, sometimes just sitting there thoughtfully. So it was quite an interesting contrast for me to see that here's the expression of the mind. You also see with children how fidgety and how agitated they are, right? And social media, these smartphones, they're all strengthening this mental plane within us, you know, like jumping from here to there, and this inability to focus and be stable. You know, that all these social media apps and smartphones, they're strengthening these processes of the mind. And then the contrast with this older guy on my right, who was, you know, much more stable, thoughtful, contemplative, and exemplifying nicely the processes of the intellect, much more stable. So you know, sometimes we'll see extremes, and then there's everything in between, right? So, you know, I mean, this is one of the wonderful things about, you know, the values of hearing spiritual knowledge, because it gives us perspective, and it gives us that distance between, you know, our natures and habits, and that higher consciousness within ourselves. So we'll start to become more of observers of what's going on within us, you know. And we'll begin to feel more distance and recognize, oh, this is my mind. Oh, this is my ego. Oh, this is my intellect. And we may not be able to act on that knowledge all the time. It will be a gradual process. But at least we'll get more perspective. We'll get more clarity. We can recognize better these different things playing within us, and this is an important first step in spiritual development. You know, just to, you know, like in AA meetings, right? What's the first step? You raise your hand and say, "Yeah, I'm an alcoholic." You know, that's already a big step. Like, you know, that person may not be able to give it up yet, but they're able to recognize, oh, because many alcoholics, they're in denial, right? No, nothing's wrong. I'm just normal, everything's fine. So that's a stage of development, to recognize, like, I can't give it up, but I can recognize that there's a problem here. So in the same way, as time goes by, throughout the course of our spiritual development, we will become more and more aware of these different natures and different tendencies playing inside of ourselves. And we won't be able to become free of them immediately. It will take time, but that's a big first step, just to recognize them. Okay, so we were talking about this bias. Psychologists, they talk about this, right? How persons have a particular bias, and with that bias, they're interpreting situations in ways that confirmation bias. I think that's the phrase I'm thinking of. Yeah, confirmation bias. Yeah, you've heard of that. Yeah. So you already have this implicit bias, and then everything that's happening to you, you're taking it as a confirmation. It's reinforcing that bias within you. So this is actually what this is the nature of the ahankar, the false ego. It's like this type of bias within us, and everything that we see, it's all reinforcing that bias that we have, and then we're transmitting that to others. So it's so brilliant the way that Srila Sridhar Maharaj explains this. A machine that is receiving and transmitting false information. That's what he's saying. It's the same thing. We're receiving a particular interpretation of the environment according to our bias, and then we're transmitting that to others and reinforcing it within others. So that is the most subtle element of the ahankar. Sorry, that's the most subtle element of the material plane. And then another aspect of this ahankar is that it causes us to conceive of ourselves as being the masters, as being in control, as being the doers, as being possessors. The literal meaning, the root meaning of this word ahankar is aham koro, which means I do. That I am the doer, and I own everything that is the result of what I am doing. Whereas with spiritual vision, we so like was it the Beatles who had this expression, I, me, and mine? This is the ahankar. This is the false ego that causes this type of consciousness, where your whole world is about I, me, and mine, what belongs to me. I am doing so many things. I am this, and I am doing this and doing that, and I own everything that comes as a consequence of that. So this is my house, and my wife, or my husband, and my children, and my money, etc., etc. Whereas with spiritual consciousness, we understand, and this is also mentioned maybe in chapter 4 of Bhagavad Gita, that we cannot do anything, actually. The only thing that the soul can do is desire. We can will for something to happen. But whether or not that takes place actually depends on so many factors in the environment, and ultimately the Lord's will in the background. Even I'm going to take a drink of this water. All I did was desire to do that. But whether or not, and we take it for granted that we can, but what happens, if our muscles aren't working properly? What happens if our esophagus is not working, our mouth is not working? What if my sight's not working properly? There's so many things. So there's the law, there's gravity, that's a cooperating here. There are so many things in the environment that are allowing for that to take place. And the brain has to be cooperating here. There's so actually hundreds of different factors that are involved and that are all agreeing and cooperating so that I can take a sip of water. Not that I'm doing this, but the environment, my circumstances, they are agreeing and they're allowing. But if one of those things changes, then I won't be able to do that. If the arm's not working, if something process in my body's not working, some function in my brain's not working, something could come and knock the cup over. There's so many factors that are allowing for this to take place. So with spiritual vision, we understand we are not the doers. Anything can only take place ultimately by the Lord's will, by the Lord's energies and by his will in the background. So therefore, I don't conceive of myself as being the owner of everything. Everything is the property of the Lord. And I'm just using his paraphernalia. I'm using, like another nice example one of my friends uses, like a farmer, who plants some tomato seeds. He'll have this sense of possession. I own, these are my tomatoes. Nobody can take these tomatoes and I'm going to sell them and that money's going to be mine. What did he actually do? All he did was put some seeds in the ground. How many incredible functions of nature and the environment allowed for that seed to sprout into a plant and to produce fruits? The sun, the winds, the rain, the earth, fertilizer. There's so many different things. Even different insects are helping to fertilize the ground. There's so many functions of biology. It's actually like a miraculous process that involves so many different aspects of the environment and so many different entities. And then I'm going to say, these are my tomatoes. I grew these tomatoes. These are my tomatoes, and I'm going to sell them, and that's going to be my money. That's the ahankar that allows us, that causes us to think like that, to have this egoic connection and interpretation of things. This mood of possessiveness. Sometimes it can get very silly, like conceptions of ownership. They can get very silly, like someone will say, oh, I own this land, and someone, silly, but unfortunately it leads to war, like dispute about who owns a particular piece of land. It gets to the point of bloodshed, and it's actually completely ridiculous. Why should any of us conceive that anything belongs to us at all? Time's ticking. I don't want to keep you all too long. Griffin saying I own this domain name. www.australia.io is mine. You can't have this virtual. So I'll finish up. I don't want to take too much of your time. I'll just finish with this one verse. So this verse in chapter, it's actually I think in chapter 3. I can't remember right now, but it gives this outline. The objects of the senses, the mind, the intellect, the ego, and then behind all of that is the soul. And the soul is described as this spark of consciousness, which is illuminating all of these other functions and allowing them to take place. And it's a very curious thing, because these different layers of mind, the intellect, etc., they are obscuring the soul, but at the same time, it is the soul that is allowing these functions to predominate and to act as they are. And there's a very nice analogy given in Srimad Bhagavatam, which gives the analogy, there's a very nice verse in Srimad Bhagavatam which gives the analogy of the moon on a cloudy night. So if you look at the sky on a cloudy night, you can't see the moon, right? You can only see the clouds. But how is it possible that you're seeing the clouds? Because of the light of the moon in the background. So in the same way, we cannot see the soul because it's covered by these layers, but we can only see these layers and identify with these layers because of the light of the soul behind. You know, when the layers are so closely connected, then you can't properly see the separating parts. You know, like if you put your finger very, very close to your eye, you can't see your finger. So when the lines of separation are so close, you can't really make a distinction between the two. So this is the power of spiritual practice, that you'll begin to recognize, as we were just discussing, you'll begin to, you know, some degree of purification will start to take place, and you'll begin to perceive this distinction between the self and then all these other tendencies that are playing in our consciousness. And we'll feel like one lady described it to me, she told me she felt like she was living in a cage. You know, like her mind was producing all these thoughts which she didn't really think. You know? We experience that sometimes. The mind just starts to take on a life of its own. It's spinning off, but we don't actually believe those things. So through, you know, as we develop spiritually, we'll begin to feel more and more, oh, there's something else within me. There's something much brighter and much more noble within myself, which is far superior to all of these other things that are playing in my consciousness. Okay, well, I think it's a good place to stop, and I don't want to keep you all too long. Lovely to meet with you all and speak with you all. Does anyone want to make a comment or a question or share anything or anything at all?
Just to say thank you. It was very interesting again, and looking forward to learning more about the soul.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I wish you all a very happy week, and hopefully we can meet next Friday. Actually, I have to check my schedule. I'm actually flying next Friday. I have to check the timing. But Kat and Griffin will update you in the group, and we'll definitely meet again. Okay, well, really, really wonderful again. My respects and affection to all of you.
Thank you. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in here. Great to see you. So Griffin, what do I need to, should I press stop video now, or do I just end?
Yeah, press stop video, I guess.
Okay.
Right. Oh no, I mean stop recording. Like if you click the recording button, then it'll stop.
Okay.
And then just when you upload it, just trim that off of the YouTube video.
Okay. I wondered, was I meant to start? Oh no, that's my video. Oh, my video. Oh, I see. Okay.
You're still recording.
Okay, I got it now. Okay. So bye, you guys.
Bye. Can I call you on WhatsApp now to?
Yeah, we can discuss that that meeting. Yeah, sure. Now's a good time. Okay.
Bye.